Henry Jackson Society, an influential British neoconservative think tank, has recently lost an important outpost of influence. The recently defeated Labour MP Jim Murphy was also the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Now likely to go down as a political failure, Murphy was one of the Society's star supporters in British politics. Not to worry, the Society still has among its prominent supporters and members senior ministers like Michael Gove and Ed Vacy, ex-MP and convicted fraudster Dennis McShane, former head of MI6 Sir Richard Dearlove, former soldier Tim Collins, and a raft of academics and journalists. Internationally, its luminaries include Richard Pearl, who according to Laura Rosen at Politico, was recently allied to the Gaddafi dictatorship and among Libya's lobbyists until its American patron turned against the regime, and former CIA Director James Woolsey, recently busy campaigning against Sharia law in America. As a think tank that exists to think tanks, the Society has only a limited public profile, yet it wields considerable influence. And to look at this influence is to glimpse a network of right-wing think tanks that operate somewhere between media and political power. The Henry Jackson Society was the brainchild of pro-war intellectuals such as Brendan Sims and Marco Attila Hoare, who began organising the group's members around 2004. Sims was an academic who had written a book denouncing Britain's lack of military action in Yugoslavia and who had trained many of the young intellectuals who would be recruited to the Society. The Society was launched in March 2005 at the peak of the war on terror and the anti-war movement with the support of a range of politicians, intellectuals and columnists, too from the Times newspaper. Its remit conveyed in its statement of principles was to advocate a forward strategy, including military intervention, to spread liberal democracy. The inspiration for the Society was the Washington Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, a hardline anti-communist Democrat, known as the Senator from Boeing because of his militarism and lobbying for the armaments producer. Jackson became a patron saint for US neoconservatives in their battle to reverse the legacy of the anti-Vietnam War movement. Initially, the Society's remit was to disseminate propaganda. In 2006, for example, it published a pamphlet called The British Moment, which aimed to win over intellectuals and politicians to the case for neoconservative politics. In practice, this meant using the media to provide intellectual ballast to whatever the White House was doing, and even urge it to go further. Thus, during Bush's surge in Iraq, leading member of the Henry Jackson Society, the conservative politician Alan Mendoza, wrote in The Guardian that it just wasn't enough, and lately it has been urging Obama to invade Syria. An equally important part of the Society's agenda is supporting Israeli aggression. When Israel embarked on its occupation of southern Lebanon, Mendoza again wrote for The Guardian to back up Israel's line that NATO should send an international force, a force for peace, to take over its occupation of the country. The Society became ever more ambitious. It even seems to have sponsored the emergence of a dodgy right-wing student group called Students' Rights in 2009, which aimed to combat what it called extremism on campuses. Many of its activities are, as journalist Ben White points out in The Electronic Intifada, directed against pro-Palestine and anti-war activists. Further, as the Huffington Post reports, gay and Muslim groups on campus have issued statements against the divisive anti-Muslim politics of the group. On the advisory board of this dubious group are the right-wing Labour MP Jim Fitzpatrick, the former Labour MP and ex-chair of Westminster's powerful Intelligence and Security Committee and a member of the equally powerful Privy Council, Kim Howells, and Alan Mendoza of the Henry Jackson Society, none of whom appear to be students. And the Society also established a base of operations at Westminster by becoming secretariat to two influential all-party parliamentary groups looking at homeland security and transatlantic and international security. All-party parliamentary groups are unofficial bodies within Westminster which bring together MPs from all parties to discuss and coordinate activities over specific issues. And through such means, the Henry Jackson Society was able to shape the policy debate within the UK Parliament. There are other questions about its financial dealings. According to the Evening Standard, one Lady de Rothschild, who sponsored a one-day conference with the Society on Caring Capitalism, embarked on a lawsuit against the organisation last year because it allegedly kept £187,000 of the money raised for the conference which didn't belong to it. Gradually, in the meantime, the Henry Jackson Society has acquired another string to its bow, that of Muslim hunting. This was one of the reasons, as the Scotsman reported at the time, that Jim Murphy had been urged to break with the Henry Jackson Society when he became Scottish Labour leader. Membership of an organisation so blatantly Islamophobic was inconsistent with leading a progressive party. He refused. The article quotes Marco Attila Hoare, a founding member of the society, saying that the organisation had become an abrasively right-wing forum with an anti-Muslim tinge. The decisive step in transitioning from straightforward Atlanticist foreign policy concerns to the Islamophobic agenda of the far right was perhaps the mass migration of the Centre for Social Cohesion, its staff and its director Douglas Murray, into the Society's ranks. So where did the Centre for Social Cohesion come from? Its parent organisation was yet another think tank called Civitas. Civitas, as its website used to explain, began as a split from the Institute of Economic Affairs, an old bastion of the middle-class right, which provided many of the ideas and intellectuals behind the Thatcherite counter-revolution. Intriguingly, several reports published by Civitas have featured leading former members of a notorious groupuscule once known as the Revolutionary Communist Party, or RCP, associated with the magazine Living Marxism. For example, an early attack on multiculturalism was co-authored by a former Living Marxism writer. The RCP has long since mutated into a right-wing libertarian group which, even before it became the online group Spiked, was responsible for a notorious Channel 4 documentary engaging in climate denial. Many of its leading figures, such as Brendan O'Neill and Mick Hume, now write regularly for the right-wing press. But Civitas did not restrict itself to traditional Thatcherite concerns such as privatising healthcare, where it has criticised the UK government for not going far enough. In its inception, it aimed to address a shortfall in Thatcherite ideology, namely its lack of attention to right-wing moral and social thinking. As such, its earliest concerns were with the traditional object of right-wing veneration, the family. It later launched a right-wing attack on immigration, particularly on the presence of Islam in Europe. As Anthony Brown wrote in a Civitas pamphlet during the Iraq War, it was a weakness to have a large minority with such divided loyalties during war. Another pamphlet issued by the think tank questioned whether what it called ideological Islam was compatible with Western values, and suggested that it was a threat to Europe on a par with Nazism or communism. In 2007, Civitas spent £274,669 on setting up a new think tank, the Centre for Social Cohesion, under the directorship of Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray, active in Islamophobic networks and linked to the US-based Islamophobes such as Robert Spencer, had written at length about the supposed threat posed by Islam to Europe and suggested in an article on the website Militant Islam Monitor that conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder across the board. Europe must look like a less attractive proposition. He had even expressed some admiration for the far-right violent street gang, the English Defence League, saying that if you're ever going to have a grassroots response from non-Muslims to Islamism, that would be how you'd want it, surely. And the Centre for Social Cohesion reflected this ideology. As a report by the academics at Spinwatch pointed out, the Centre, alongside the more established right-wing think tank Policy Exchange, embarked on a Cold War against British Muslims, supporting the serious curtailment of civil rights for Muslims. By 2011, the agenda of the Henry Jackson Society as a neoconservative warmongering outfit sufficiently overlapped with the Islamophobic crusades of the Centre for Social Cohesion that the Society was able to absorb the whole of the Centre and its staff and director. The most recent controversy to befall the Henry Jackson Society concerns its status as a charitable organisation. As a charity, it must have charitable objects, goals compatible with the rules of the Charity Commission. The Society's goals are ostensibly to advance the education of the public in national and international politics, social and economic policy. But among its activities, as the Middle East Monitor reports, were a parliamentary briefing paper lobbying MPs to vote against the recognition of the State of Palestine. Fortunately for the Society, the head of the Charity Commission is William Shawcross, who is also a neoconservative and on the board of the Henry Jackson Society. The Charity Commission under his watch has diligently pursued Muslim charities for alleged infractions. 1 in 4 charities investigated last year was Muslim, according to The Guardian. Shawcross has told The Times that he considers Islamic extremism the biggest danger to the charitable sector. But the Henry Jackson Society would appear to be safe. The reality is that the Society is part of a network of powerful right-wing lobbies which claim charitable status, but which exist to use corporate and right-wing money to hijack the political process. And the Henry Jackson Society is among the most effective.